All right, the government is boosting funding to more services, including the Salvation Army, to ensure more people can access support for domestic and family violence during the coronavirus pandemic. Joining me now is Minister for Families and Social Services, Anne Ruston. Anne, thank you for joining us tonight. This is a great initiative. I think many Australians would applaud this because, despite being in the midst of a pandemic, we still have the scourge of domestic violence very much being part and parcel of society these days.
Look, absolutely. And one of the things that we want to make sure as a government through this package, which was announced recently by the Prime Minister of $150 million to go towards various initiatives around domestic violence, is to make sure that we're prepared. We obviously, we don't want the situation to escalate, but we need to make sure that whatever happens when we've basically sent Australia home for a few months, to make sure that if people find themselves in a situation where they need help, we need to make sure they know where to get the help and that the help is available if they need it.
Now, Minister, we had an extraordinary situation earlier in the week here in Queensland where a magistrate in Cleveland made an impassioned plea from the bench that she finds it hard to sleep at night when she actually hands out domestic violence orders because she's wondering, is this another example or another case where it'll be breached and we'll see the death of a particular person. I mean, it touches everywhere, doesn't it?
Look, it does, and I think the thing that we've seen over recent times, and I mean the situation in which I'm sure you're alluding to, the terrible situation with Hannah Clark that happened earlier this year, really brought it into everybody's living room about the absolute horror of domestic violence. And even though we're putting things in place to make sure that we have got the services there for people through this coronavirus pandemic, the reality is that domestic violence is with us all the time, and we as a nation need to keep working harder and harder and harder, not just to respond to it when it happens, but to stamp it out before it even starts. And so it's so important that we continue under any circumstances to make sure that every Australian understands, firstly, there's help there if they need it, but to make people understand that it's a completely unacceptable thing to happen in any family or in any household, that a woman or her children or a man for that matter should feel unsafe at home. It's just not acceptable.
And I think that, the men of this country, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, need to show some leadership on this sort of stuff. We need to start calling out, domestic violence. We need to start calling it out straight away. Now, you've extended the cashless debit card in Queensland, South Australia and Western Australia till later in the year. What's the rationale behind that?
Well, all of our trial sites were due to finish their trials on the 30th of June. At the time we made the decision to extend it to the 31st of December, we really didn't know what the 30th of June was going to look like. And to be fair, I'm not sure that we really do know what the 30th of June is going to look like even now. So what we chose to do was to extend the trials out to the 31st of December, and hopefully by then we're in a position to be able to continue our consultations, particularly in some of our more remote communities who don't want anybody out there at the moment. But hopefully by the 31st of December we'll be in a position to be able to conduct that consultation and get the feedback so that we can make some decisions about what it looks like going into the future.
Now, it's been rolled out in places like Bundaberg and Hervey Bay. I've had Keith Pitt, the federal MP whose electorate takes into account Bundaberg, and he loves this particular scheme. He thinks it's fantastic. What do you see as the advantages in this particular scheme? Because there are critics, obviously.
Look, there are, but there are also some really great supporters, and Keith has been a great supporter in his local community for the benefits that he's seeing of having the cashless debit card. But one of the things that we have been working on quietly behind the scenes, and we've continued to work on it during this corona pandemic, has been to develop technology so that we can make the card even better. For instance, one of the complaints about the card has been people who've said that they feel like they're stigmatised when they go into a shop and they use their cashless debit card. The person behind the counter knows that they're on this particular program. Whereas if we were able to get the technology where we want it, and we think we're almost there, we can actually put the cashless debit card on your phone, like many people nowadays just swipe their phone. So the person behind the counter will be none the wiser what sort of card that they're using unless they try and buy a restricted good. So there's lots of great technological advances that I think will make this card even better than it currently is. But also, I think with the trials, we're starting to see that there's some great financial literacy learnings where people are able to budget better so that they can make their money last out for the entire period. So I think there's some really good things that we can come out of this if people just give it a chance.
Minister, on the front page of today's Australian, we saw the story where there is a concern that suicides will actually be greater than the death toll for the coronavirus pandemic because of the impact on businesses, because of the impact on people's livelihoods. Are you concerned? What sort of challenge does that present to you as a senior minister in the Morrison government?
Well, look, the great challenge that we've faced right from the get-go with this pandemic has been we're sort of facing two crises, really. The health crisis, which I think, most Australians would have to say has been handled pretty well in Australia, but also the economic crisis and the social implications of that economic crisis have to be managed in conjunction. So as we've had to shut our economy down to make sure that we dealt with the health crisis, we're now in a situation where we need to open our economy up as quickly as we possibly can within the constraints of the health requirements so that we can actually get businesses back operating, we can get people back to work, that we can get a level of normality back into people's lives. Because I'm sure, like you, I was very distressed to read this morning's Australian and the report that had been brought down by those medical experts in relation to the implications of mental health and the subsequent potential suicide. And it was tremendously distressing, but certainly the government in all areas that we see that we have the potential for this pandemic to have a significantly negative impact. We're making sure we make those investments, whether they be in the domestic violence support that we're putting in place, whether it be in the mental health programs that Greg Hunt is putting in place through the health department. Because, as I say, we must plan for the worst and hope that obviously that isn't the case, but we will continue to plan, we'll continue to monitor, and reports like this morning's just makes it even more important that we work as hard as we can within the health constraints to get our economy operating again so we can get people back to work, we can get life back to normal, and we can do whatever we can to try and avoid the terrible consequences that the modelling this morning suggested could happen if we can't get our economy back operating as quickly as possible.
And that's even more important as to why, some states, and obviously I'm talking about Victoria here, have to really grasp the nettle and go hard and try and look at not just the health aspect, which of course you've mentioned has been outstanding, but also look now beyond that. True leadership is about making tough decisions, and I think right now there's a couple of states that aren't going down that path. Anne Ruston, thank you for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.